Welcome to the channel Tired Historian. Here we dive into the past so you can drift off to sleep with ease and even learn something along the way. Don't forget to subscribe and give this video a like right now, because by the time the lecture ends, you'll likely already be fast asleep. And now history begins. At the very heart of Mesopotamia, on the fertile banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, there once stood a city that ancient people already called both a symbol of greatness and of corruption. To some, it was a place of unimaginable wealth and luxury. To others, it embodied human arrogance and downfall. Its walls were thought to be unassailable. Its tower seemed to rise into the heavens, and its legendary hanging gardens became one of the 7 wonders of the world, ensuring Babylon's fame for centuries. This was a place where reality merged with legend, and history blurred into myth. We remember Babylon today not as just another vanished city of antiquity, but as the emblem of an entire civilization. It lived on in myths, in religious texts, and in the pages of the Bible, leaving a permanent mark on humanity's cultural memory. Babylon came to symbolize both splendor and sin, wealth and destruction, hope and punishment. Our journey tonight will take us through Babylon's history, showing how a modest settlement along 2 rivers transformed into the symbol of a great civilization. Around 4,000 years ago, the fertile plain between the Tigris and Euphrates became the cradle of one of the world's earliest civilizations. In this land of marshes, reeds, and meadows, people first learned to cultivate crops, dig irrigation canals, and build permanent settlements. The earliest known inhabitants of this region were the Sumerians, a mysterious people whose origins remain uncertain. They were the first in human history to build great cities: Ur, Uruk, Lagash, and Kish. Each was an independent city-state with its own rulers, armies, lands, and temples devoted to the gods who were believed to guard and protect its people. The Sumerians also created the world's first system of writing, cuneiform, around 3200 BCE. At roughly the same time Egyptian hieroglyphs appeared. They devised complex astronomical calendars and drafted some of the earliest known written laws. Meanwhile, in the north and central regions of Mesopotamia, Semitic tribes known as Akkadians emerged. They spoke Akkadian, a language related to what would later become Hebrew and Arabic. Over time, the Akkadians adopted much of Sumerian culture and achievements, reshaping them to fit their own traditions. Eventually, the 2 cultures blended, giving rise to a broader Mesopotamian civilization, upon which Babylon would later be built. Babylon likely existed as a small settlement long before the 20th century BCE. But around 2000 BCE, it began to stand out among the many city-states of the region, slowly emerging as a political entity in its own right. At first, it was nothing more than a modest town surrounded by fields and swamplands, one of countless similar places struggling to survive amid constant warfare and raids. As people lived simple lives, farming, crafting, and trading with nearby cities. They worshipped the same deities as the Sumerians but addressed them with their own names. At the heart of Babylonian life stood the temple, where rituals and sacrifices were carried out to secure the favor of the gods and good harvests. The Babylonians spoke a dialect of Akkadian and wrote in cuneiform, though the Sumerian language itself had already faded from daily use. Like Latin in medieval Europe, it remained only as a sacred language for religious ceremonies. Everyday records, however, were written in Akkadian cuneiform. Surviving documents, business accounts, letters from merchants, marriage contracts, and trade agreements reveal the bustling economic and social life of early Babylon. Still, in those days Babylon remained in the shadow of stronger, more powerful city-states. To survive, it had to tread carefully, avoiding conflict with its neighbors. Yet, thanks to its prime location at the crossroads of vital trade routes linking northern and southern Mesopotamia, Babylon gradually grew wealthier and more influential. Merchants passing through stopped more and more often, turning the city into a regional hub of commerce. Little by little, Babylon expanded and strengthened. But its most brilliant chapter began in the 18th century BCE, when a ruler came to power who would change its destiny forever. Hammurabi and the First Great Babylonian Code of Law. The destiny of Babylon and all of southern Mesopotamia was forever changed under the rule of Hammurabi. It is his name that is tied to the city's first great flourishing. When Hammurabi inherited the throne around 1792 BCE, Babylon was already a notable city among the states of Mesopotamia, though it was far from being the center of the region. At that time, it was just one of many states caught in constant struggles over fertile lands and control of trade routes. Hammurabi was not only a shrewd ruler but also a skilled military leader. He quickly realized that the prosperity and strength of his reign depended on uniting the small, rival states of southern Mesopotamia and ending their endless feuds. Over several decades, he waged wars and conducted careful diplomacy with his neighbors. Step by step, he subdued rival cities, sometimes through clever alliances, other times through force of arms. By the middle of his reign, Hammurabi had brought much of Mesopotamia under his authority, creating for the first time a unified and powerful state with Babylon as its capital. Under Hammurabi, the city transformed from a regional hub into the thriving capital of an empire. The city grew rapidly, encircled by strong walls and adorned with grand palaces, towering temples, busy markets, and vibrant public squares. At his court gathered some of the most gifted minds of the age: scholars, priests, scribes, merchants, and architects. But Hammurabi understood that true stability required more than military strength and political alliances. To rule such a vast and diverse kingdom, clear and universally applied laws were necessary. He wanted his empire to be not just strong, but just. Thus, Hammurabi ordered the creation of one of the world's earliest surviving legal codes, the Code of Hammurabi. This monumental code was carved into a massive stone stele and placed in the heart of Babylon so that everyone could see the laws by which society was now governed. Containing 282 articles, the code covered nearly every aspect of daily life: trade, property rights, marriage, inheritance, crimes, and punishments. It spelled out responsibilities to the state and to fellow citizens, leaving no ambiguity about what was permitted and what was forbidden. Among its most famous principles was the law of retribution, often summarized as an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Though it may sound brutal to modern ears, in its time it represented an effort to ensure punishments were fair and proportional to the crime. The laws protected property, regulated contracts, set standards for lending, and even defined strict responsibilities for builders. For example, if a house collapsed and killed its owner, the builder could be executed. If the owner's son died in such an accident, the son of the builder would be put to death. Harsh as this may seem, it instilled a culture of accountability and precision in craftsmanship. At the same time, Hammurabi's laws reflected the stark inequalities of ancient Mesopotamian society. The code distinguished clearly between free citizens, freedmen, and slaves. If a free man lost an eye, the offender would lose his eye in return. But if the same injury was inflicted on a slave, the punishment was merely a monetary fine. Such differences reveal the rigid social hierarchy of the era. Slavery itself was carefully defined within the laws. Slaves formed an essential part of Babylon's economy and daily life. Many were war captives taken during Babylon's military campaigns, while others became slaves through debt bondage. If someone failed to repay a loan, they could fall into temporary servitude. However, debt slavery was limited. After 3 years, the debtor was freed. Slaves could also be born into the condition, or people could sell themselves or their relatives into bondage during times of famine or hardship. In rare cases, free citizens could be enslaved as punishment for crimes. Though harsh, Babylonian slavery had boundaries, firmly regulated by law. Punishments under Hammurabi's code were often severe. Death sentences could be imposed for theft, false accusations, sorcery, adultery, or harboring runaway slaves. Collective responsibility was also common. The family of a wrongdoer could be punished for his crimes. The laws were revolutionary in their clarity and organization, but they also reflected the harsh realities of ancient Mesopotamian life. Through this system, Hammurabi turned Babylon into a model of stability and governance, uniting diverse peoples under a single order. The rise of Marduk's cult. Another defining feature of Hammurabi's reign was the elevation of the god Marduk. Before this period, Marduk was only one among many Mesopotamian deities, worshipped locally without great importance. His cult was rooted in Babylonian tradition, but it had not yet taken on a dominant role across Mesopotamia. During Hammurabi's time, however, Marduk began his ascent, eventually becoming the supreme god of Babylon and later the central figure of the entire Mesopotamian pantheon. The rise of Marduk's cult. During Hammurabi's reign, Marduk became the chief patron deity of Babylon and the protector of the entire empire. The king himself claimed that his authority and right to unite southern Mesopotamia came directly from Marduk, whom he considered his personal guardian and the defender of Babylon. This decision carried not only religious weight but also major political significance. By elevating Marduk, Hammurabi provided his diverse empire with a common spiritual foundation, strengthening unity and consolidating royal power. Babylonians often depicted Marduk as a mighty warrior armed with a bow or lightning bolts, symbols of his divine authority and strength. He was shown wearing a tall horned crown, emphasizing both his godly nature and his high rank within the pantheon. Under Hammurabi, Marduk's priesthood also began to rise in influence. Though not yet the dominant political force they would later become, during this period the priests gained important privileges and started playing a role in state affairs. In later centuries, particularly during Babylon's Golden Age, the priestly elite would grow into one of the most powerful groups in society, capable of shaping the fate of kings and influencing the empire's direction. Thus, Hammurabi's era marked the beginning of Marduk's ascent, paving the way for his eventual transformation into the central figure of Babylonian religion and politics. The full development of his cult, mythology, and relations with other deities would come later, during the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Decline and fall of Babylon. After Hammurabi's death, his kingdom faced severe trials. The once strong and unified empire quickly entered a period of turmoil and instability. The cause lay partly in the weakness of his successors, too inexperienced and lacking in authority, and partly in the very nature of Hammurabi's empire. It had been held together largely by his personal charisma and military might. Once he was gone, many of the cities and regions he had subdued rose in rebellion, seeking independence once more. The following years were marked by constant wars, uprisings, and civil strife, which drained Babylon's strength. In this weakened state, the city became vulnerable to outside threats. Around 1595 BCE, disaster struck when the Hittite king Mursilai I led a sudden invasion from Anatolia. The attack took Babylon completely by surprise, The Hittites marched swiftly over great distances and stormed the city before it could mount a proper defense. The Hittites, an Indo-European people who had settled in Anatolia after migrating from Eastern Europe, were renowned for their powerful chariots. But in this campaign, it was their speed and the element of surprise that proved decisive. They broke into Babylon, looted its immense wealth, and left behind destruction. Palaces, temples, and city walls were torn down. Although the Hittites did not remain to occupy Babylon and soon withdrew north, the damage was devastating. The sack stripped Babylon of its prestige and shattered its authority in Mesopotamia. The invasion of the Kassites. Soon afterward, Babylon fell into the hands of another people, the Kassites, a warrior people who came from the mountainous lands east of Mesopotamia. The Kassites were not related to the Sumerians or Akkadians, and their origins remain uncertain. Modern scholars believe they may have been distant ancestors of peoples who later inhabited western Iran. Unlike the Hittites, the Kassites did not storm Babylon with sudden raids or widespread destruction. Their arrival was gradual, and many historians describe it as a peaceful occupation. Rather than suppressing local traditions, the Kassite rulers adopted Mesopotamian culture. They embraced the Babylonian language, religion, and customs, and even modeled their administration after Babylonian practices. Under their rule, Babylon slowly recovered from the devastation. Kassite kings often styled themselves as kings of Babylon, showing respect for the city's traditions and heritage. They rebuilt temples and public buildings, supported the priesthood and scholars, and encouraged the arts and crafts. The Babylonian scribes and priests maintained their respected status, while temple complexes continued to play a central role in society. Thanks to this relatively peaceful governance, Babylon entered a long period of stability that lasted for centuries. Though the city never regained the same political dominance it had under Hammurabi, it remained a major cultural and intellectual center. Scholars and priests preserved ancient Sumerian and Akkadian knowledge, copying texts and expanding archives. Babylon became known as a city of learning, home to libraries and repositories of wisdom, admired throughout Mesopotamia. The Kassite dynasty, though it could not restore Babylon's imperial power, gave the city centuries of peace and cultural growth. The decline of the Kassites and the rise of Assyria. The period of Kassite stability and cultural recovery could not last forever. Their dynasty managed to hold power until around 1155 BCE, after which Babylon gradually slipped from their control. The following centuries brought renewed instability, and by the beginning of the first millennium BCE, a new and formidable power had emerged on the Mesopotamian stage: Assyria. The Assyrians, who spoke Akkadian and lived in northern Mesopotamia, were determined to expand their domains and bring the lands of southern Mesopotamia under their rule. From the 9th century BCE onward, their kingdom grew steadily stronger, especially under ruthless and ambitious rulers such as Ashurnasirpal II and Tiglath-Pileser III. The Assyrian army was famed for its discipline, organization, and brutality. It swept across new territories with great speed, and the wealthy, strategically vital city of Babylon naturally became a prize of enormous interest. Relations between Babylon and Assyria in this era were highly unstable. At times, the two powers were allies or uneasy partners. At other times, bitter enemies locked in war. Assyrian policy toward Babylon also swung dramatically, ranging from respect for Babylonian religion and culture to ruthless acts of violence and destruction. One of the most tragic episodes came under King Sennacherib, who in 689 BCE razed Babylon to the ground after yet another rebellion. The devastation was immense. Temples, palaces and neighborhoods were leveled, leaving deep scars on the city's economy, culture, and collective memory. Yet despite repeated destruction, Babylon always found ways to rebuild. Even the Assyrians themselves, despite their cruelty, were forced to acknowledge Babylon's enduring importance as the spiritual heart of Mesopotamia. The cult of Marduk remained central. The Great New Year festival, the Akitu, was so significant that even Assyrian kings traveled to Babylon to participate, reaffirming their authority and receiving symbolic approval from the gods. This underscored the dual political and spiritual prestige of Babylon in the eyes of the Mesopotamian world. The Babylonian priesthood played a key role in preserving the city's religious status and cultural identity. Priests of Marduk held immense authority, often acting as spiritual leaders of resistance against Assyrian domination. They helped maintain a sense of unity and pride among Babylonians, even under foreign rule. Priests also served as intermediaries between conquerors and the local population, negotiating and defending Babylonian interests. Nevertheless, resentment grew. Heavy taxes, harsh punishments, repeated invasions, and the humiliating status of a subjugated province fueled unrest. Rebellions broke out time and again as Babylonians sought to reclaim their freedom and restore their former greatness. Gradually, the idea of a decisive uprising began to take root. By the mid-7th century BCE, Babylon's patience had reached its breaking point. Oppressive Assyrian rule had bred anger that could no longer be contained. In 626 BCE, this anger erupted into open revolt. The revolt of Nabopolassar and the Neo-Babylonian Empire. At the head of the uprising stood Nabopolassar, a determined and capable leader who succeeded in uniting the different layers of Babylonian society. He was not only a skilled general but also a shrewd politician, gifted with the ability to inspire hope and confidence. Nabopolassar came from Babylonian nobility and enjoyed both the respect of the people and the support of Marduk's priesthood, who saw in him a leader capable of restoring independence and dignity to Babylon. From the very beginning, he acted decisively, organizing local militias, rallying popular support, and seeking alliances with neighboring peoples who, like the Babylonians, had long suffered under Assyrian domination. Soon the Chaldeans and Medes joined the cause, providing crucial strength to the rebellion. At first, the Assyrians, confident in their reputation as the strongest military power of the time, underestimated the danger. But as the conflict spread and escalated, they realized too late that they were facing not just another revolt, but a full-scale war that threatened their empire's very survival. Nabopolassar skillfully exploited Assyria's weakening state, setting in motion events that would permanently shift the balance of power in Mesopotamia. The revolt of Nabopolassar and the foundations of a new empire. At the time of the uprising, Assyria was already weakened by internal strife and economic troubles, which greatly favored the Babylonians. One of the defining features of Nabopolassar's revolt was his reliance on ancient traditions and the cult of Marduk. The priests strongly supported his cause, persuading the people that the gods themselves had blessed their struggle. Nabopolassar presented his fight as being carried out under Marduk's will, claiming that the chief god of Babylon had turned away from the Assyrians and once more looked kindly upon his chosen city. This religious legitimacy played a crucial role in uniting the population and inspiring warriors to face an enemy that, on paper, seemed far stronger. Step by step, Nabopolassar laid siege to and recaptured key cities and fortresses, driving Assyrian garrisons out of Mesopotamia. Through a series of victories, he secured Babylon and its surrounding lands, and by the end of his reign had expelled the Assyrians completely. In doing so, Nabopolassar not only restored Babylon's independence, but also established the foundations of a powerful new state that would soon rank among the greatest empires of the ancient Near East. With Assyria defeated, a new dynasty firmly took hold in Babylon, the Chaldean dynasty founded by Nabopolassar himself. Yet the true golden age of Babylon was not his achievement alone. That honor belongs to his son and successor, whose name became legendary, Nebuchadnezzar II. Nebuchadnezzar II and the height of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Nebuchadnezzar II ascended the throne in 605 BCE, inheriting from his father a strong and stable kingdom. But his ambitions went far beyond merely preserving power. He dreamed of restoring Babylon to the glory and dominance it had once enjoyed under Hammurabi centuries earlier. Unlike past eras, this time the dream was within reach. Babylon had the strength, resources, and opportunity to become a true superpower. In the first years of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar focused on consolidating central authority and strengthening the army. He understood well that successful expansion required discipline, logistics, and military readiness. Soon, he launched a series of swift and successful campaigns that dramatically expanded Babylon's territory. His attention was directed mainly westward, toward the rich lands of the Levant and Canaan, contested fiercely by the great powers of the age. Nebuchadnezzar subdued Syria, Phoenicia, and Judah, gaining control over vital trade routes and projecting Babylon's influence deep into the Mediterranean. One of his most significant achievements was the conquest of Judah and its capital, Jerusalem. The first siege of Jerusalem in 597 BCE ended with the capture of King Jehoiakim and much of the Judean elite, as well as the installation of a puppet king, Zedekiah, loyal to Babylon. In the east, Nebuchadnezzar conducted some military operations, though the major conquests of Elam and neighboring regions belonged to earlier Mesopotamian rulers. His own focus remained firmly on the western frontier and the rivalry with Egypt, Babylon's main competitor for control over the Levant and North Africa. Through these victories, Babylon assumed the role once held by Assyria as the leading power of the Near East. Now only Egypt remained as its rival, and Babylon became a central player in international politics. Its dominion stretched from the Mediterranean Sea in the west to the Persian Gulf in the east, making it one of the largest and most influential empires of its time. What set Nebuchadnezzar's rule apart, however, was not only the scale of his conquests but also his system of governance. Though strict, his rule allowed conquered peoples to keep their language, culture, and religion, provided they paid tribute and recognized Babylon's supremacy. Local rulers who remained loyal were often kept in power, which reduced unrest and strengthened stability across the empire. The wealth pouring into Babylon was immense. Gold, silver, ivory, exotic woods, spices, and luxury goods from across the empire flowed into the capital, fueling an unprecedented period of economic and cultural prosperity. Under Nebuchadnezzar's leadership, Babylon became the true heart of the ancient world, its very name a symbol of majesty and strength. Historians remember his reign as the golden age of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Religion under Nebuchadnezzar II. The flourishing of Babylon was not limited to politics and conquest. Its religious life also reached its peak under Nebuchadnezzar. The cult of Marduk, which had been rising in importance since the 7th century BCE, reached its full maturity during his reign. Marduk was now revered as the supreme lord of the universe, his status elevated beyond all other gods. The grand temple of Asagilus served as the center of his worship, and the most important ceremonies, particularly the New Year festival, Akitu, revolved around it. During this festival, the statue of Marduk was carried in procession, and the king himself took part in rituals affirming his divine mandate to rule. In one striking ritual, the high priest would strike the king across the face, and the monarch was expected to shed tears, signs of humility and sincerity before the god, repentance and the submission to the gods. During the New Year festival, when the high priest struck the king, the shedding of a tear was seen as proof of humility before the gods. If the ruler failed to display the proper repentance and submission, his authority was considered threatened, as both the people and the gods might deny his right to rule. Yet the religious life of Babylon was not centered solely on Marduk. Other deities played equally significant roles, and among them none was as powerful and contradictory as the goddess Ishtar. Ishtar, goddess of love and war. Ishtar was one of the most complex figures in Near Eastern mythology. She embodied love, fertility, passion, and sexuality, yet at the same time she represented war, vengeance, and destruction. Her image reflected the duality of life itself, in which joy and prosperity coexisted with suffering and violence. A central element of her cult was the ritual of the sacred marriage, in which the king symbolically entered into union with Ishtar through her high priestess, believed at that moment to be the living embodiment of the goddess. This overtly erotic ritual symbolized the union of divine and mortal, ensuring fertility of the land, prosperity of the kingdom, and the strengthening of royal power. The ceremony was performed with music, singing, and ritualized intimacy, emphasizing both solemnity and sensuality. In myth, Ishtar often appeared as a passionate, jealous, and unpredictable goddess. Many stories told of the tragic fates of her lovers, both divine and mortal, who suffered abandonment, punishment, or death once her desire faded. One famous example is the Epic of Gilgamesh, where she attempted to seduce the hero. Aware of the ruin that had befallen her previous lovers, Gilgamesh rejected her advances. Enraged by this insult, Ishtar turned to her father, the sky god Anu, and demanded that he unleash the bull of heaven, a terrible beast that ravaged the land and brought death to many. The descent of Ishtar to the underworld. Another celebrated legend tells of Ishtar's descent into the underworld, ruled by her stern sister Ereshkigal. Driven by ambition and the desire to extend her authority even into the realm of the dead, Ishtar clothed herself in royal finery and jewels, each piece symbolizing her divine power. At each of the 7 gates of the underworld, the gatekeeper Neti forced her to surrender part of her attire: her crown, earrings, necklace, belt, bracelets, garments, and finally even her underclothes. Thus stripped of all symbols of power, she stood naked and powerless before her sister. The act symbolized a universal truth. Even the greatest gods lose their might when descending into the realm of death. Ereshkigal, furious at her sister's intrusion, ordered that Ishtar be seized and hung on a hook in darkness and torment. While she was imprisoned, life on earth withered. Plants stopped growing, animals ceased to reproduce, and love vanished from the world. Humanity faced famine, sterility, and despair. The gods, alarmed by this catastrophe, convened to save her. The wise god Ea Enki fashioned 2 beings capable of entering the underworld and negotiating with Ereshkigal. Through diplomacy and cunning, they persuaded the goddess of the dead to release Ishtar. But the laws of the underworld could not be broken. No one left without another taking their place. When Ishtar returned to the world of the living, she discovered that her beloved Dumuzi, Tammuz, had shown no grief in her absence. Worse, he had taken her throne and enjoyed its luxuries. Furious at his betrayal, she decreed that he be seized and dragged into the underworld as her substitute. In time, however, the gods granted mercy. Dumuzi would spend half the year below and half above, a mythic explanation for the seasons, the cycle of death and rebirth in nature. This myth became one of the earliest foundations of the concept of the dying and resurrecting god. Later echoed in the cults of Osiris in Egypt, Adonis in Greece, and Attis in Phrygia. Shamash, god of the sun and justice. Another central figure of Babylonian religion was Shamash, the sun god and the divine embodiment of justice. To the people of Mesopotamia, he was not only the bringer of light and warmth, but also the cosmic judge who oversaw the deeds of gods and men, ensuring fairness and truth. He was often depicted as a radiant deity surrounded by beams of light, holding the symbols of authority and law. In Akkadian and Babylonian tradition, Shamash was also associated with the image of a solar chariot drawn by horses, in which he crossed the heavens each day. Though this imagery was not as developed as the Greek concept of Helios, it still emphasized his eternal struggle against the forces of darkness. The most important symbol of Shamash was the solar disk, representing divine light, truth, and the unyielding power of justice. The solar disk and the cult of Shamash. One of Shamash's main symbols was the solar disk, marked with 4 rays and a wavy border, often found on seals, amulets, and temple walls. The chief centers of his worship were the cities of Sippar and Larsa, where the grandest temples dedicated to the sun god were located. In these sanctuaries, the cult of light and justice reached its fullest development. The temples of Shamash were not only places of worship but also vital centers of public life. Many disputes were settled within their walls. While formal court cases were usually overseen by appointed judges and elders, priests of Shamash frequently acted as arbiters and witnesses, delivering verdicts in the god's name. Thus, the figure of Shamash became inseparably linked to the very idea of justice, and his temples were regarded as sacred spaces where truth and law prevailed. In hymns and prayers, Shamash was praised as a protector of the oppressed, the poor, and the vulnerable. People believed he always sided with those who suffered injustice and could not defend themselves. In times of conflict, hardship, or legal trials, Babylonians turned to Shamash, seeking his guidance and fair judgment. According to ancient texts, each morning when he rose into the heavens, Shamash illuminated the earth and saw all human deeds. Nothing could escape his all-seeing gaze, which reminded people of moral accountability and the certainty of divine retribution. His importance was especially emphasized in Babylonian law. On the famous stele of Hammurabi, it is Shamash who is depicted handing the king the code of laws, a powerful symbol that all justice and royal authority originated from the supreme divine judge himself. The influence of Shamash extended beyond Mesopotamia. His dual role as sun god and divine judge left its mark on the religious traditions of neighboring peoples. Echoes of his cult appear in ancient Hebrew writings, where God is also portrayed as an all-seeing defender of the weak. Later, similar traits emerged in the Iranian god Mitra, revered as a deity of light and truth, an Enki god of wisdom and fresh waters. Another central deity of Babylonian religion was Ea, known as Enki in Sumerian tradition, the god of wisdom, knowledge, and the life-giving freshwater of the subterranean abyss. His presence was vital in Mesopotamian myths of creation and in stories describing the interaction between gods and humankind, for he was the one who revealed to people the secrets of crafts, rituals, and hidden knowledge. Unlike many other deities, Ea was not feared as harsh or vengeful. Instead, he was revered as a benefactor and protector of humanity. He was said to dwell in the cosmic freshwater ocean, the Apsu, source of all rivers, springs, and fertility. From his underwater palace, Ea directed the flow of life-giving waters that nourished fields and gardens. Water itself symbolized not only life, but also knowledge and wisdom, the ability to understand the mysteries of the world. Ea's wisdom and ingenuity made him the diplomat of the gods, often called upon to settle disputes among them peacefully. Ancient stories describe him as eloquent, cunning, and persuasive, capable of softening even the sternest divine judgments. In this way, he was frequently contrasted with harsher gods such as Enlil, whose wrath he often sought to temper in defense of humankind. One of the most significant myths connected with Ea was the tale of the Great Flood, later echoed in the biblical story of Noah's Arkansas. In Mesopotamian versions, the hero of the flood has different names depending on the source: Atrahasis in the Epic of Atrahasis, Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and Noah in the biblical tradition. When the gods resolved to destroy humanity with a flood for its disobedience, it was Ea, moved by compassion, who secretly warned the chosen man of the coming disaster. He instructed him to build a great vessel, bringing aboard his family, animals, and plants. Thanks to Ea's wisdom and mercy, humankind survived, reinforcing his role as a guardian and savior of mortals. Ea was also regarded as the patron of knowledge, magic, and ritual practices. Though not directly associated with the invention of writing, that role belonged to the god Nabu. Ea was believed to have granted humanity the skills of agriculture, construction, healing, and especially ritual purification with water and spells against demons. His priests were renowned as magicians, healers, and masters of sacred rites, and his temples became important centers of magical and cleansing ceremonies essential to daily life in Babylon. The primary center of Ea's worship was the ancient city of Eridu, considered one of the oldest sacred cities of Mesopotamia, where his great temple stood as a source of wisdom and divine blessing. The Temple of Ea and his symbolism. The great temple of Ea was revered as the very source of divine wisdom and magical power, drawing pilgrims from across Mesopotamia. Ea himself was usually depicted as a bearded, wise god, surrounded by streams of fresh water, holding vessels from which flowed the rivers of knowledge and fertility. His sacred emblem was the goatfish, called Suhermishu, a mythical creature symbolizing his dual nature as both lord of the waters and wise benefactor of humanity. This figure frequently appeared on temple reliefs, seals, and amulets, representing protection, abundance, and the wisdom bestowed by the god. In artistic depictions, Ea was often shown surrounded by flowing waters filled with fish, further emphasizing his dominion over the life-giving element. The Enuma Elish creation epic of Babylon. One of the most important works of Babylonian mythology is the epic poem Enuma Elish, literally, "When on high," from its opening words. This masterpiece recounts the origins of the world, the gods, and humankind, while affirming the supreme role of the god Marduk. According to the poem, in the beginning of the universe there existed only two primordial deities: Apsu, the freshwater ocean, and his consort Tiamat, embodiment of saltwater and primordial chaos. From their union came the first generations of gods, who soon filled the universe with noise and activity. Annoyed by the constant commotion, Apsu and Tiamat resolved to destroy their offspring and restore the cosmos to silence. But the young and cunning god Ea discovered their plan. To save the younger gods, he cast Apsu into a deep sleep and slew him. From Apsu's body Ea built his magnificent underground palace, which became his eternal dwelling. When Tiamat learned of her husband's death, her fury was boundless. She raised an army of monstrous creatures and demons, appointing the mighty warrior Kingu as their commander. She gave him the tablets of destiny, granting him supreme authority over the cosmos. Faced with this terrible threat, the younger gods trembled, until one champion rose to meet the challenge. Marduk, renowned for his strength, bravery, and wisdom. Marduk agreed to fight Tiamat on one condition. If he triumphed, the gods must acknowledge him as their supreme ruler. Desperate, they accepted, granting him command. The battle between Marduk and Tiamat became one of the most dramatic episodes of Mesopotamian myth. Armed with a bow, arrows, a net, and a mighty mace, and accompanied by storms and winds that obeyed him, Marduk confronted the Chaos Dragon. With a decisive shot, he pierced Tiamat's immense body, splitting her in two. From her remains, Marduk fashioned the cosmos, the heavens from one half, the earth from the other. He established the cosmic order, fixing the paths of the sun, moon, and stars to measure time and mark the cycles of days, months, and years. Kingu was captured and stripped of the tablets of destiny, which were given to Enlil but ultimately affirmed Marduk's supremacy. From Kingu's blood, mixed with clay, Marduk created humankind. Because Kingu had led the army of chaos, humanity inherited a symbolic burden of guilt. Thus, people were destined to serve the gods, laboring to ease their burdens so the deities could live in rest and glory. The cultural role of the Enuma Elish. This epic was central to Babylonian religion and identity. Each year, during the Akitu New Year festival, the Enuma Elish was recited aloud in solemn ritual, reaffirming Marduk's cosmic victory and his role as the supreme god of Babylon. For Babylonians, the myth was not only a cosmogonic story of creation but also a profound moral and spiritual allegory. The triumph of order over chaos, law over anarchy, and divine strength over destructive forces. It reminded the people of Babylon of their duty to uphold justice, honor the gods, and preserve harmony in the world. Sacrifices in Babylonian religion. A fundamental part of the religious beliefs of ancient Babylonians was the performance of rituals and sacrifices. According to their worldview, the gods required regular offerings to maintain harmony between the divine and human realms. Sacrifices were seen as the fulfillment of humans' duty to the gods. People honored and fed the deities, and in return, the gods granted protection, prosperity, and fertility. The most common form of offering consisted of daily gifts presented in all major temples and sanctuaries of Babylon. These were simple but symbolically significant items: freshly baked bread, animal meat, beer, and various incense. Bread and beer were especially prevalent as they symbolized fertility, abundance, and human labor. Wine, being rarer and an imported luxury, was offered only on special occasions or during major rituals. Incense was essential, as the smoke was considered a kind of food for the gods, carrying prayers to the heavens and giving the deities a sense of satisfaction and reverence. In addition to daily offerings, larger sacrifices of animals were regularly performed. Sheep, bulls, and various birds were typically used. These animals had to be flawless, healthy, and robust. In major temples, dozens of animals were dedicated to the gods daily, carefully raised and selected for ritual use. Grand offerings occurred during major festivals such as the New Year, Akitu, when cities offered a variety of fruits, breads, and beers. The ritual was accompanied by prayers, hymns, and solemn ceremonies. Part of the meat would then be consumed by the priests, symbolically uniting humans and gods. In times of severe crisis, catastrophic military defeats, prolonged droughts, or epidemics, Babylonians occasionally resorted to extreme measures. Human sacrifice, though rare, was sometimes performed when people believed ordinary offerings could not appease the gods' wrath. Victims were usually prisoners, condemned criminals, or slaves, those considered socially expendable or guilty in the eyes of society. The substitute king ritual. One particularly unusual ritual in ancient Babylon involved a substitute king. This practice was carried out when omens, astrology, or divination predicted danger or severe illness for the reigning monarch. Priests and advisors would select a low-ranking person, often a poor individual who bore some resemblance to the king. The substitute would be temporarily declared king, dressed in royal attire, and adorned with the regalia of power. He would live in the palace for several days or weeks, participating in ceremonies, receiving ceremonial honors from courtiers and the populace. The purpose was to redirect divine wrath from the true king onto the stand-in. The ritual was short-lived and fatal for the substitute. At its conclusion, he was ritually executed, usually by strangulation, poisoning, or stabbing, in secrecy and with solemn reverence. This act symbolically transferred the god's anger to the substitute, ensuring the real king could continue to reign safely and prosperously. After the ritual, Babylonians believed that the threat had passed, the gods were appeased, and the monarchy reaffirmed. The Golden Age of Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar II. The reign of Nebuchadnezzar II marked a true golden age of Babylon. During this time, the state reached the height of its power and influence on the international stage, while experiencing extraordinary cultural and scientific flourishing. Babylon became a recognized center of civilization, with vibrant development in the sciences, arts, and especially architecture, which amazed contemporaries and left a lasting legacy as a symbol of ancient grandeur. Nebuchadnezzar undertook massive construction projects that transformed the city into a magnificent capital, shining with luxury and strength. Most notably, he significantly reinforced and expanded the city walls, making Babylon nearly impregnable. Ancient authors such as Herodotus described these walls as monumental, approximately 25 meters high, and so wide that several chariots could drive side by side atop them. Architecture and wonders of Babylon. Modern archaeologists, however, consider some of the ancient descriptions of Babylonian walls to be somewhat exaggerated. Nonetheless, the city's fortifications were indeed massive and imposing, featuring numerous towers and bastions, along with deep defensive moats filled with water from the Euphrates. This made Babylon one of the most securely protected cities of the ancient world. Among the architectural marvels of this period, the gates and the Ishtar Gate stood out, serving as the main ceremonial entrance to the city's northern sector. The gate hosted important processions and official ceremonies. Named after the goddess Ishtar, it was decorated with brilliantly glazed bricks. Mythical creatures and sacred animals, including dragons, bulls, and lions, were depicted in colorful ceramic tiles against a deep blue background symbolizing the heavens. The processional way, leading from the Ishtar Gate into the city, was similarly adorned with glazed bricks and symbolic imagery, creating an awe-inspiring effect for visitors. The Etemenanke Ziggurat, the Tower of Babylon. Perhaps the most legendary and mysterious structure in Babylon was the Grand Ziggurat Etemenanke, later associated with the biblical Tower of Babylon. Dedicated to the supreme god Marduk, this stepped temple symbolized cosmic order and the power of the Babylonian kingdom. The name Etemenanke translates as House of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth, emphasizing its connection to the cosmos and Babylonian creation myths. The ziggurat consisted of 7-step terraces, each smaller than the one below. At the summit was the sanctuary of Marduk, accessible only to the high priests and the king. Ancient sources report that the tower may have exceeded 90 meters in height, an extraordinary engineering achievement for the ancient world. Contrary to popular belief, archaeological evidence suggests that not all bricks were glazed. Decorative glazed bricks were likely used selectively for the most prominent sections. Beyond its religious purpose, Etemenanke also served important astronomical functions. From its upper terraces, priests regularly observed the stars, charting celestial movements and creating calendars for religious festivals and agricultural cycles. While it was not a formal observatory in the modern sense, its upper levels did allow systematic astronomical observation. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Among Babylon's most romantic and enigmatic constructions were the legendary Hanging Gardens, known as the Gardens of Semiramis. So extraordinary and unique were they that they were later included in the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Historians and archaeologists still debate whether these gardens actually existed or were a beautiful legend, yet their stories continue to inspire imaginations worldwide. One popular version holds that the gardens were built by Nebuchadnezzar II as a gift for his beloved wife, Queen Amytis, a name recorded only in later sources. According to legend, Amytis came from the mountainous region of Media, abundant in greenery, streams, and cool gardens. Babylon, surrounded by hot deserts and endless plains, reminded her of home, and she longed for its landscapes. To comfort her and provide a glimpse of her native environment, Nebuchadnezzar commissioned the construction of these magnificent gardens. The Hanging Gardens were described as a massive, multi-tiered structure resembling a stepped pyramid or cascading terraces. Each level was reinforced and waterproofed with layers of bitumen and lead to prevent soil erosion. Fertile soil was added to grow diverse trees, flowers, shrubs, and exotic plants brought from various parts of the ancient world. The gardens were designed so that the plants seemed to hang in midair, hence the name. One of the most remarkable achievements of Babylonian engineers was the sophisticated irrigation system, which kept the gardens lush in the harsh Mesopotamian climate. According to ancient sources, water was lifted to the upper terraces using chain pumps or water wheels powered by animals or laborers. Water then cascaded down the terraces, nourishing plants and cooling the air, mimicking mountain streams that Amytis longed for. Descriptions of the Hanging Gardens appear in several classical sources, including Diodorus Siculus and Strabo, who wrote of them as an astonishing sight even for well-traveled visitors. The Greeks called these magnificent gardens paradisos, from which the modern word paradise derives. Ancient writers described towering trees, lush canopies, fragrant flowered walkways, and shaded corners, creating the impression of a heavenly garden in the midst of the desert. Despite these detailed accounts, archaeologists have yet to find conclusive evidence of the garden's existence in Babylon itself, prompting ongoing debate and speculation among historians. One of the most convincing modern hypotheses, proposed by Stephanie Dalley of Oxford, suggests that the famous Hanging Gardens may have actually been located in Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, and constructed under King Sennacherib of Assyria. Hellenistic confusions and the Hanging Gardens. Later, during the Hellenistic period, Greek historians may have confused the Assyrian gardens with Babylonian ones, transferring them in imagination to the more famous Babylon. The name Semiramis, often associated with the Hanging Gardens, does not historically relate to the time of Nebuchadnezzar II. In ancient texts, Semiramis refers to the legendary Assyrian queen Shemuramat, who lived long before Nebuchadnezzar's era. Thus, the name likely became linked to the gardens much later through romanticized and legendary accounts. Even if the Hanging Gardens truly existed, they were most likely not an independent structure, but rather part of a larger palace complex constructed by Nebuchadnezzar. Science and knowledge in Babylon. Babylon's achievements went beyond architecture. Its science and scholarship were exceptionally advanced, playing a crucial role in the development of ancient Mesopotamian civilization. The Babylonians excelled in astronomy, mathematics, writing, and the systematization of knowledge, leaving a unique and invaluable legacy for later cultures. Astronomy in Babylon. Astronomy held a central place in Babylonian intellectual life. Babylonian priests were among the most skilled and precise observers of celestial phenomena. From the heights of temple complexes and upper terraces, they carefully monitored the movements of stars, the moon, and planets, recording their observations on clay tablets. They did not merely observe. They developed mathematical models to predict celestial events. For instance, the Babylonians successfully forecasted solar and lunar eclipses, discovering the Saros cycle, a period of 18 years and 11 days after which eclipses recur with remarkable accuracy. Babylonian scholars were the first to systematize astrological predictions based on observed phenomena, blending astronomy with religion into the unified discipline of astrology. The zodiac, in its finalized form, appeared in late Babylon, around the 5th century BCE, thanks to Chaldean astronomers, although individual constellations and observations had been recorded much earlier. Mathematics in Babylon. Babylonian mathematics was closely tied to practical needs, commerce, construction, and astronomy, but was surprisingly advanced and even theoretical for its time. They employed a sexagesimal base 60 numeral system, which is why we still divide hours into 60 minutes and minutes into 60 seconds today. Babylonian mathematicians solved complex problems, calculated areas and volumes, determined proportions and percentages, and even solved problems resembling early algebraic equations. Their methods were meticulously recorded on clay tablets, which survive to this day, demonstrating remarkable precision and depth. Libraries and archives. Libraries and archives played a vital role in preserving and transmitting Babylonian knowledge. These archives systematically collected documents across many fields, from religious texts and legal codes to scientific tables and literary works. The most famous example is the library of Assyrian king Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, but similar collections existed in Babylon, containing thousands of clay tablets with mathematical calculations, astronomical tables, and business records. Unlike papyrus or parchment, clay did not decay, preserving knowledge for millennia. Thanks to these tablets, we can study Babylonian achievements in detail today. Babylonian science deeply influenced later civilizations. Through the Greeks, particularly the renowned scholar Ptolemy, Babylonian astronomy and mathematics entered European scientific tradition, laying a foundation for future development. The Babylonian exile of the Jews. In 586 BCE, a defining event reshaped the destiny of an entire people, the Babylonian exile of the Jews. After the first capture of Jerusalem by Babylon in 597 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar placed his vassal king Zedekiah on the Judean throne, expecting complete loyalty. Zedekiah eventually rebelled, seeking support from Egypt, which led to harsh consequences. In 587 BCE, Babylonian forces laid siege to Jerusalem, which lasted over a year. The city fell in 586 BCE after intense fighting. Nebuchadnezzar punished the rebels severely. Jerusalem was almost completely destroyed, the walls demolished, and the Temple of Solomon burned. Many inhabitants were killed or died from starvation and disease. The most tragic consequence was the forced exile of a significant portion of the population to Babylon, beginning the famous Babylonian captivity, which lasted roughly 50 years. The Jews were relocated to a foreign land among foreign gods and customs. They were not slaves in the strict sense. Many could still practice crafts, trade, and achieve a degree of social success. Yet longing for their homeland and the destroyed temple never left their hearts, as reflected in Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat and wept, symbolizing sorrow and hope for return. During the exile, the Jews came to fully understand the universality of Yahweh. Without the temple or traditional sacrifices, they reinterpreted their faith. Yahweh was not merely the God of the land of Israel, but the one universal God of all the world. This marked a critical stage in the formation of Judaism as it is known today. During this period, the tradition of synagogues, community prayer houses, emerged, helping maintain religious and national identity far from home. Religious texts were collected and systematized, later forming parts of the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. Babylonian captivity transformed Judaism from a temple-centered religion into a book-centered faith rooted in texts and spiritual tradition. The fall of Babylon. The final chapter in ancient Babylon's history came in 539 BCE, when the forces of Cyrus II of Persia, known as Cyrus the Great, approached the city walls. Babylon, long considered impregnable and a symbol of absolute power, suddenly faced the prospect of complete conquest. Cyrus, an exceptional military leader and wise ruler, had unified vast territories, creating the largest empire of his time, the Achaemenid Empire. His strength, strategic skill, and ability to navigate the political and religious sentiments of conquered peoples allowed him to capture Babylon virtually without bloodshed, ending the city's centuries-long prominence. The fall of Babylon and its later history. Ancient historians Herodotus and Xenophon tell a dramatic story of military cunning, by which Cyrus the Great supposedly captured Babylon. According to these accounts, he diverted the waters of the Euphrates into pre-prepared canals, allowing his troops to enter the city along the dry riverbed. This vivid narrative was popular for a long time, but modern historians doubt its accuracy. It is more likely that the city surrendered without significant resistance, or that it was handed over to Cyrus through negotiations with the Babylonian elite and priesthood. Evidence of Cyrus's peaceful and diplomatic approach is found in the famous Cyrus cylinder, an essential archaeological artifact. On this cylinder, Cyrus describes his conquest of Babylon, presenting himself as a liberator who restored order, honored the local gods, and protected the rights of the city's inhabitants. The cylinder is often referred to as the first declaration of human rights, highlighting its historical significance in the development of humanitarian ideas. Cyrus paid special attention to the Jews held captive in Babylon, allowing them to return to their homeland and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. This decision is reflected not only in the Bible but also in the text of the Cyrus cylinder. His policy was thus not only politically wise but also religiously and culturally tolerant, making Cyrus one of the most respected rulers of his time. Babylon under Persian rule. Cyrus's conquest did not mark the end of Babylon's fame and grandeur. In the years immediately following the conquest, the city retained special status and considerable influence. Babylon effectively became a secondary capital of the Persian Empire, and Persian kings regularly visited, participating in famous religious celebrations such as the New Year festival, Akitu. Despite this respect, Babylon lost its political independence forever, becoming part of the Persian realm. Over time, it became one of the empire's important provinces. During this period, Babylon gradually declined. Rebellions against Persian rule erupted repeatedly, especially under kings like Darius I and Xerxes, accelerating the loss of the city's political importance. Key decisions were increasingly made not in Babylon but in Persepolis, Susa, and Ecbatana, as administrative and economic centers shifted. Babylon and Alexander the Great. Babylon's history briefly flared again in the 4th century BCE, when Alexander the Great arrived in 331 BCE. Alexander was fascinated by Babylon's legendary history and grandeur, choosing it as one of his main eastern residences. He saw the city not only as a strategic hub, but also as a symbolic location, affirming his status as the successor to the great kings of Mesopotamia. Alexander intended to make Babylon the capital of his New World Empire, blending Eastern and Western cultures. He planned extensive restorations, focusing particularly on the Ziggurat Etemenanke, dedicated to the god Marduk. However, despite these ambitious plans, Alexander accomplished almost nothing. He unexpectedly died in Babylon in 323 BCE at the peak of his power. With his death, his grand vision for the city collapsed. After Alexander's death, his vast empire was divided among his generals, the Diadochi. The Seleucid dynasty quickly moved the power center to the newly founded city of Seleucia on the Tigris, while Ctesiphon later became the regional capital. The transfer of key trade routes and administrative centers to these new cities dealt a fatal blow to Babylon, depriving it of economic importance and influence. Decline and ruin. The city's decline became gradual but irreversible. Inhabitants left in search of better opportunities, and once magnificent buildings slowly fell into ruin from neglect and time. By the 1st century BCE, Babylon was largely a shadow of its former glory, though small settlements persisted among the remnants. The final decline and the relocation of the remaining population are generally dated to the early centuries CE. Roman travelers and historians, such as Strabo and Pliny the Elder, described Babylon as sad ruins, evoking more sorrow than admiration. The legendary city had become a silent reminder of the transience of human greatness. Since then, ancient Babylon has remained a symbol of both splendor and decay, of power and vulnerability. Its legends and achievements continue to inspire and astonish, reminding us how easily mighty empires and great cities can vanish, leaving only memories and historical lessons behind. If you want, I can now combine all your Babylon-related translations into one complete, polished English narrative, from religion and architecture to science, exile, and the city's ultimate decline. This would create a seamless text suitable for publication or study.